Hey there, everybody. Welcome back to the Only Podcast. My name is Chris Vanini, and I am your host, and I'm joined, as always, by theonlycolors.com managing editor, Joe Toohey. And we're coming to you, recording this at the end of signing day on Wednesday, and it was an eventful day in some aspects and not so much in others. We got a lot to talk about, obviously the football recruiting. We got a big basketball game this weekend, too. Michigan State travels to Michigan. And Joe, how was your signing day?
It was pretty good. I have some somewhat hilarious news for you, and I think you'll appreciate it. So, um, I live in this apartment in Ann Arbor that is a three-person apartment, and I have a third roommate who is looking for a sublet. And I would like you to guess who I believe is going to be potentially moving in with me probably within the month.
Who? Someone about like a student's age?
Yeah, I would say he's in the 25 to 26 age range.
Okay.
He may or may not have an Australian accent.
Ric Flair. Blake O'Neill.
Yeah, yes, that is
How is this
potentially.
not the front? How is this not the top breaking news story on the Only Colors?
Well, okay, so a couple.
If it happens, it'll have to be. Although I imagine he wouldn't like that.
So, well, there's a couple things there, right? Number one is that I was a little hesitant to even tell you on the podcast just because I want him to be comfortable in the place, right? My one roommate.
Wait, you mean uncomfortable?
Well, I mean, he did me a pretty big favor, so anyways, but my point here is just that I don't want to jeopardize my roommate finding a subletter for his place just because it seems like that would be kind of a jerk move. But yeah,
no one's listening. No one will know. So
I may or may not be sharing a kitchen with with Blake O'Neill here in the next few weeks.
Okay, so last week you were visiting, or a couple weeks ago last week we talked about you visiting Wisconsin to go to grad school, and now you might be a roommate of Blake O'Neill. Like, this is like the most undercover anybody could be.
It's true. Yeah, there's a lot there.
We'll have to have him on the podcast if it happens.
That would be pretty sweet, actually. Yeah, I mean, I think he'd probably be pretty gracious about it too. But anyways, I probably need to get to know him a little bit first before I can do much. I mean, I've got MSU flags and MSU throw pillows, and all kinds of stuff all over the apartment. So it's going to be. We only are living here for the next 3 months or so, so it won't be a very long time that I'll be living with him. But
you seem like a cool.
I figured you needed to know that.
I think everybody at theonlycolors.com needs to know that. You seem like a cool dude based on all the interviews I'd seen. I thought he handled everything well, considering all the vitriol thrown his way after that whole deal. But all
the absurdities that came alongside with it.
So you've had a couple interesting weeks there. So he has one more year of eligibility left, doesn't he? I assume if he's gonna.
Yes, I think that's right.
Figured he'd be gone. I figured he'd probably be gone now. So, good punter. Right. I mean, one play aside, he's a very good punter. So,
yeah, I assume he's got an NFL future ahead of him. So
okay. Well, man, I don't even know where to go from there. I don't even know how to segue into that. It's like everything else is gonna just feel minuscule compared to that. So, we're going to talk about signing day here. For the Michigan State Spartans, who, when the day began, they had the, I think, number 12 class in 24/7's composite rankings, and by the time of this recording, they are down to number 22, and they only lost one person in that span. With Austin Robertson, looks like he has a pending legal issue going on, and his questionable future appears not to be a surprise to those on the inside. But other than that, it was essentially just other teams jumping MSU by grabbing up a lot more players. The Spartans brought in, what they bring in, about 20. What's the final number that they listed here? 21.
There's 19.
19. Okay, 19. Plus they got the early enrollee guys. So
right.
So yeah, it's what started out to seem to be the best D'Antonio class ever, turned into a typical, I think, above average D'Antonio class, relatively speaking, without much changing. So how you look at the class ranking depends on the context. It's almost essentially the same class as it was when it was ranked number 12 24 hours ago. But they did miss out on a couple of guys that they tried to get on late in Prince Salmons, who went to Auburn, Lavert Hill, who went to Michigan, although that seemed I don't think some of their misses were really surprises. So maybe they didn't get the extra dessert to go on the top of the class, but everything that they expected to happen happened, other than Robertson, which again maybe they kind of did expect. So Joe, when you shape up the class, what do you take away from it?
Yeah, I mean, I think the other thing you have to mention alongside the class ranking is just that it's a small class compared to a lot of classes, right? Anytime you're bringing in a class that's under 20 guys, it's a pretty small class. So I think in terms of average recruit quality, it's probably the best in the D'Antonio era, probably the best since they kind of started keeping track of these things online. And that's awesome. And part of the reason why you have a small class is just because of continuity and guys getting 60 years, guys like Brandon Clemens,
right,
and Davis, those guys getting some eligibility to stick around. I bet the class would be a little bit larger had those guys not gotten additional years of eligibility.
And you can count. I mean, you can sort of count that alongside, like you said, count that along the class. To have Ed Davis come back for a sixth year, all Big Ten linebacker, is absolutely huge for them. And I think D'Antonio might have said it today. One of the reasons maybe they're not as highly ranked is because they typically bring in smaller classes because they don't have hardly any attrition within the program, whether it's guys choosing to leave, whether it's guys being nudged out the door, or whether it's guys not being given a fifth year straight up. They keep their guys, and that's one of the reasons they always typically bring in classes around this size.
Right, and the other thing I'll say is that the commits that they got in areas of need, especially wide receiver, is the one that really stands out big to me. Will show a little bit more, I think, this year than in previous classes, where true freshmen don't always play a whole lot, depending on who they are. I mean, a couple years ago, you saw Malik McDowell play quite a bit, but I think last year there weren't really many major contributors that were true freshmen other than LJ Scott. I guess there started 2 true freshman safeties for a couple games during the year. So I guess I take a little bit of that back. But between Cam Chambers and Donnie Corley, who was Mr. Football in the state of Michigan, and Tristan Jackson and Justin Lane, there's a ton of potential guys that could contribute next year. And the fact that there are so many of them makes it highly likely, I think, that one of them kind of sticks and is a major contributor in some sense next year.
Oh yeah, and especially with what they have coming back at receiver, they've got R.J. Shelton, Felton Davis, and that's pretty much it, right? I mean, Monty Medeiros is there, but in terms of guys who have played, so this is kind of like 2012 when they lost B.J. Cunningham and Keith Nickel, and
or going further back, like 2008,
Keyshawn Martin.
Yeah, when Keyshawn Martin played as a true freshman, Mark Dell was a sophomore. So B.J. Cunningham was a true freshman.
Yeah, they've gone through these cycles where they lose. They've had wide receiver heavy classes every few years. Just by the way, just based on the way the roster is set up. I'm sure they'd like to balance that a little bit more, but it's kind of the way it is. To bring in four-star receivers absolutely fills, that need. But there might be growing pains. There were a lot of growing pains in 2012, and you look at that group of Benny Fowler, McGarrett Kings,
Keith Mumphrey.
You look at where they were in 2012 compared to the end of 2013 and 2014, and they took big strides. So there may be some growing pains with some of these young guys to start, but I think the fact that Corley and Chambers are early enrollees should help with that a little bit. And the other area where they helped themselves, where they lost some guys, was the defensive line, bringing in 4-star Josh King from Illinois, defensive end, tackle Naquan Jones from Illinois, defensive tackle Mike Panasiuk. All three of those guys from Illinois. So MSU really did pretty well in that state to fill the needs that they had at the defensive line position, losing a couple of guys. And then on the offensive line, I think they probably would have liked to bring a little bit more, considering losing Jack Conklin early. But and also Muffy Hunt on defensive line will be available after he was going to go on his Mormon mission, but it had got hurt or something. So he's kind of technically an addition to this class because he hasn't been in school. So, and then on the offensive line, they added a couple guys, 4 guys. It looks like all of them 3 stars. So I think they probably would have liked to add a little bit more on the offensive line, but once again, they filled the holes with bodies, and I think that's what they were trying to do. D'Antonio was very high on Josh King. Talked about him being a wrestler. He's 6'6", 245. He's one of those tall defensive ends that they really like to have in the mold of a William Golston or a Shalik Calhoun. They really like those tall defensive ends, and I think they got a good one in Josh King. Anybody other specifics on the class that stand out to you?
Yeah, I mean, I think when you look at the star ratings of the offensive linemen, they don't seem all that standout. However, one of them is an Allen brother, and to me, it seemed like he committed early, which was not surprising, and so he might not have gotten quite as much attention as both Brian and Jack Allen got. Mm-hmm. But my guess here is that he's going to be pretty good. He is relatively small at this point, only 260-ish pounds, but has obviously a lot of room to grow. So I think, and then also AJ Arcuri, who got brought in after the whole Gavin Cup craziness earlier in the year, seems like he's another one of those tall guys, 6'6", has a lot of room to fill out. And I was high on Luke Campbell. We talked about him a little bit last week. So yeah, I mean, I think it's a pretty straightforward MSU class, right? There's a lot of guys who are maybe not incredibly highly rated, but have a lot of upside, and it's pretty well balanced in most respects. I do think that D'Antonio would have liked to get one more defensive end, as you mentioned. It is possible that Austin Robertson still ends up in the fold, but he did say that he also opened up his recruitment a little bit.
Although that sounds like it might be not his decision. So
right, and the way that I put it on TOC was that he decommitted because of the wording of his tweet. But my guess is that that wasn't entirely one-sided.
Right. I mean, there were a couple of MSU recruits who. So, based on the timing of everything, that's what it sounds like from other folks. So, but yeah, like I said, maybe one more offensive line, maybe one more defensive line would have been Robertson. But other than that, like I said, it's a typical, above average D'Antonio class. A couple other guys maybe might have put it up a little bit more, but at this point, when you see what MSU's done, a Rose Bowl, a Cotton Bowl, a playoff, 2 Big Ten championships, 3 Big Ten championships going back to 2010. D'Antonio is more than proven himself in terms of player development. That's always important to keep in mind when you're looking at the rankings as they relate to MSU.
Yeah, the one thing I will say is that I kind of wish that they had landed a running back in this class. The trio that's there, the four guys who are there are all pretty young still. Delton Williams only has one more year of eligibility, but L.J. Scott and Madre London obviously were freshmen this past year. Gerald Holmes was a sophomore, so they've got a lot of eligibility, but it's those classes where you don't pull in one guy at the position that can hurt you down the line, right? That
Especially
what year it was with Jay Harris and Trey Kilgore were the only receiver commits, and then we know what happened to Jay Harris, and Trey Kilgore seems to have just never really materialized into much on the depth chart. So it's stuff like that when next year probably not a big deal. 2017 probably not a big deal, but maybe in 2018, maybe in 2019 you go, boy, in that 2016 class it would have been nice to have running back. But running back's also one of those holes that you can fill relatively easily with young guys, so it might be not as big a deal as other position groups.
They made a late push for, I forget his name, but I think it was one of the top running backs in the country who was committed to Penn State. He opted to stick with the Nittany Lions, so they did make a late push there. But yeah, these classes under, really for a while under D'Antonio have been very position heavy in certain areas, and running back may be one of those down the road. I think it's just kind of how the roster is shaping up. But like you said, Delton Williams could be out soon. If someone transfers, then again there's another hole in there. So that's where you'd like to have the depth too. So I'm sure they would have probably liked to have added a running back who fit, but they didn't.
Yeah. Last thing, the other really interesting thing about this class to me is that in previous classes it seemed like D'Antonio was willing to sort of leave the Midwest a little bit more than he did in this class. There's really only one commitment from a player outside of the Midwest, which is Cam Chambers. Everybody else is from...
two from New Jersey.
Well, okay, so Theo Lucuza is from Traverse City originally. He moved to New Jersey for his final year of high school. So to me, I know he's listed as being from New Jersey, but he's a Michigan guy in my eyes anyways. So everybody is either from Michigan, Ohio, or Illinois, which you can think of it in a couple different ways, right? It's interesting that at a time when MSU's brand is as strong as it's ever been, and D'Antonio said as much in his press conference, that so we've sort of the program has sort of consolidated in the Midwest to some degree. So that's interesting. And Austin Robertson too was an Indiana guy. So,
well, I think part of it, not the whole thing, but I think a little part of it might have been what was available, because Michigan completely left the Midwest. They other than, I think they got 2 or 3 guys from Michigan. I don't think they had any. I don't know if they had anybody from Ohio. So that's I think a spot where MSU was able to maybe fill in some gaps that normally they wouldn't have, maybe if they would have pulled a player from Texas or from Virginia or something like that. When instead, with Michigan essentially out of the picture in the Midwest, it opened up a few more possibilities, especially because this was a good year for the state of Michigan too, in terms of players available. And Ohio is always good. They got 8 guys from Ohio. And then Illinois, 5 players from Illinois, all of whom were pretty highly rated. So I think part of it was the circumstances around what was available too. So, but yeah, I mean, you look at New Jersey, Michigan grabs 5 of the top 8 players there. MSU grabs 2 of the top 9. So
yeah, Illinois was an interesting one to me because MSU got the top 2 guys in Illinois, which were Josh King and Naquan Jones, and then 3 of the top 6, which Josh King, Naquan Jones, and Mike Panasiuk, or however you pronounce his name. And so that's pretty interesting, especially given how weak Illinois has been for some period of time now. That's a program that you would think would be able to pull in some of their top guys, but you talked about New Jersey, and Rutgers is also really struggling within their state. So it really kind of depends, I guess, to some degree. But Illinois is a huge state, and it seems like
there's a lot of
making
talent.
inroads there is useful,
especially in the Chicago area, which is where a lot of these guys were from, in the Chicagoland area. So there have been some years where they got a couple of players from Pennsylvania. I think, resource-wise, MSU is always going to be a pretty Midwest-focused group. I mean, if you look at what Ohio State was under Jim Tressel, that's what they were. Something Urban Meyer has done since coming aboard is he doesn't take as many Ohio kids as Tressel did. And, Harbaugh this year isn't taking as many Midwest kids because they have the cachet and the resources to go national. Tressel didn't really do that very much. And I think D'Antonio being a Tressel guy, obviously that's always going to be their base. And when Michigan essentially, goes elsewhere, it opens up a lot more spots, opens up a lot more guys in the area for MSU too.
Yeah, I agree. And there are benefits to that, right? You get guys who have some personal stuff on the line when they are from the region, I think. And yeah, I'm not opposed to it. It's just an interesting feature of this class that there's not a random guy out of Arizona like Brian Lewerke last year. So
yeah, I mean, it'll be interesting to see how 2017 shakes out too, because that's I think when you'll really see the boost from the playoff appearance. It's kind of in the next year, because when MSU made the playoff, it was 2 months until signing day. So we'll see.
Yeah, most of those guys had already committed.
So yeah, I just think it was a couple of different circumstances, but so any other thoughts? Yeah.
Ultimately, right, this class is absolutely good enough to get MSU where it needs to go. If you're an MSU fan, you're happy with the class, right?
I mean, it depends on where you think where we need to go. It's not Alabama, but they're never going to be Alabama. They're never going to recruit on the level of a Michigan or Ohio State on an annual basis, because they don't have the resources. Ohio State and Michigan facilities still blow MSU out of the water. MSU's are very good, but when you compare them to the Michigan, Ohio State are two of the richest athletic departments in the country, and MSU's never going to be at that point. So there are inherent disadvantages that are always going to be there. Had MSU played in Oklahoma in the playoff, maybe they could have made the national championship game. Like Alabama's on the it's kind of like with MSU basketball with Duke. Typically, when MSU faces Duke, MSU's got maybe 1-2 McDonald's All-Americans, while Duke is full of them. And it's just that talent gap that MSU is not able to make for various reasons. And I don't think MSU is ever going to be able to recruit on that level. But you're contending for a national championship, and that's what these classes have gotten you. And I think that's all you can ask for. I don't think, expecting a national championship is a spot MSU can be, but winning the Big Ten, making the playoff is a goal. It's a realistic goal. It's a goal they've made, and it's a goal that these classes will continue to help them get toward, I think.
Right, and the playoff levels the playing field to some degree, in that I think in the past there was almost a self-reinforcing, and there's almost certainly still a self-reinforcing narrative to recruiting classes, and then the way that programs are seen in the eyes of the nation. But at the same time, now that there are 4 programs who get into that playoff, evens the field to some degree. It's still there's a little bit of building yourself up to the level in which you can be taken seriously that MSU had to get to between 2010 and 2014, and got there, and now sort of has that recognition to some degree. And you saw it in the 2014 football season, right, where MSU went through the year and lost to the 2 biggest opponents that they had, and still got into the Cotton Bowl, and were ranked quite highly, given that their best win was against Nebraska and their second best win was against Shruggy Emoticon.
Right.
So right. I think we're on the same page there. But in terms of
they've got the respect. I mean, they've got the respect nationally from media to be in that conversation for the national championship. I'm just talking more in the eyes of recruits. Now, I mean, MSU's a winner in the eyes of recruits, but they don't have the resources to sell that the other kids do, and I don't. They never will. And you look at the schools that are recruiting at the top, and they've all got top of the line stuff, and MSU's, you know, maxing out everything it can, and that's what D'Antonio's done, and that's what D'Antonio, you know, will continue to do. So, anything else on recruiting or signing day you want to talk about?
Nope, that's all I had.
Alrighty. So actually, before we move to basketball, I want to talk about the Michigan signing of the stars event. I thought it was pretty cool. I know you didn't watch. You didn't seem to watch most of it. I just really wanted to watch Ric Flair, but Harbaugh really continues to push the envelope of creativity, and it was a really smart event they did. And aside from all these celebrities that they had there, which you knew, they had some celebrities send in like video congratulations, which just seemed like weird. Like Owen Wilson, like congratulating Jim Harbaugh in a class, like it was just like weird. Like if I was a kid, I think it was. If I was a recruit, I think it's the coolest thing in the world. But the one that got me was Drew Brees, the Purdue quarterback, congratulating Michigan in its recruiting class. Drew Brees, who's one of his biggest college memories was beating Michigan while at Purdue, is just so like weird, and I think it illustrates how good Harbaugh is to bring people in that you wouldn't expect, whether it be all the celebrities or whether it be, you know, a Purdue quarterback. I mean, Brees doesn't even have to be, you know, out there, you know, pushing for Purdue, but to actively, you know, agree to you know, give a rub to Michigan was just surprising to me that he would do that. And while we talked about Ric Flair, he played football at Minnesota, but he didn't mention that in his speech today. He said he signed a letter of intent under Bump Elliott, which I don't know if I think he walked down at Minnesota, so I don't know exactly how it played out, but it did not take long for him to start talking about the women on campus in typical Ric Flair fashion. But I thought it was funny. But something else that was funny. He says he's all with Michigan. He doesn't care for Ohio State. He doesn't have time for Michigan State. He's friends with Bubba Smith, and he'd say it to his face. And Bubba Smith died in 2011, so I don't know if he knows that or not. But it was Ric Flair off his rocker, perhaps inebriated, but he always is. And as a wrestling fan, I just thought it was funny. And I think Harbaugh does a really good job of. He does a great job of. It's interesting how he does a great job of manipulating media when he's so bad with media. Like his press conferences are, you know, boring and short. He doesn't reveal anything. But when he wants to make a headline, he absolutely knows how to do it. And it wasn't simply announcing this event. It was announcing the event, and every couple of days, oh, here's another guy, here's another guy, here's another guy. So he's always in the headline. It wasn't just one thing, here's everybody. It was very smartly done by him. You didn't see much of it. I imagine you didn't think much of it, but you know, what was your take on that?
Yeah, I mean, if you are following a Donald Trump style media campaign, then sure. Yeah, I mean, it's you use the media to just have constant coverage, and we're talking about it right now.
Right.
It's I mean, and then you have a sleepover at a recruit's house as soon as the. Right. I mean, I don't know.
I think we talked about that before. That was a little weird. But in terms of just this event, if I was a kid, I would have thought it was cool. I think more schools need to do a better job of incorporating their alumni. I mean, Michigan State, you know, Le'Veon Bell and Draymond Green recently are great ambassadors for the school. But, you know, there's always more they could do. You know, Mateen Cleaves and Magic Johnson is, you know, the biggest one, and he does a lot with them, and he's always involved with the basketball program. But I'm curious to see if more schools do events like this next year and tap into their alumni. Like Purdue or the other one, Dick Enberg. Dick Enberg was gave a congratulations on one of these videos. He went to Central, like the student athlete like academic center at Central is named after Dick Enberg. The Chip's got to get on that and involve him in some way. I think, like I said, I think Harbaugh's just going to make recruiting staffs and make people think differently about how they go about things, and it'll be interesting to see where it goes.
Yeah, I mean,
I don't think you'll see it from MSU and D'Antonio really ever, but so it's interesting.
Yeah, it's a way of keeping your name relevant all the time. Absolutely. But yeah, like I said, recruiting at a certain level creeps me out a little bit. And
it's only getting more too. If you look at the way
I know
social media's evolved, you got Jim Leland dabbing, you got players committing while skydiving. It's a circus, and I don't fault the kids for it. And it's one of the few times where they get all the attention on themselves. Enjoy it, and it's up to the coaches, I think, to humble them when they get to campus, and that's where I think the good coach separates themselves from the bad coach. You can bring in a good class. There are schools who continually bring in good classes but don't put the product on the field, and that's where the difference is.
Yeah, my favorite from this recruiting cycle was McCole Hardiman. I think is how you pronounce his name. But on Twitter, he said that he was no longer doing his silent commitment anymore. And an SB Nation recruiting account tweeted at him, "So you're decommitting publicly from your silent commitment?" And he said, "Oh yeah, I'm not doing it anymore," as a response. Which to me just kind of summed up how strange and bizarre the recruiting world is, that this Twitter conversation was happening and the recruit himself didn't seem to totally understand the implications of what he was doing at any level. And it was, it's a bizarre, the whole thing is really quite bizarre. And it seems to me like it's probably not necessarily to the benefit of the kids. Now, yeah, if the whole process is more fun and kids get more out of it, whether that's trips that are sponsored by universities or what have you, great. But I'm not sure that we're serving the student athletes as well as we could with the way that this works, and then all of the Twitter harassment they all get. I mean, it's a mess.
The coaches got to do it, but man, has social media and texting has just taken it to a whole new level. Kirby Smart, now the Georgia coach, former Alabama defensive coordinator, said a year ago that every coach he knows or ever talks to they're all thinking about going to the NFL if they had the chance, because of just how much recruiting, like, it's nonstop now. I mean, coaches already work around the clock, but if they take, they want to go to a movie with their family, they want to take a quick vacation, they're getting texts. They always got to, they got to hit their guys. And I wrote, Kirby Smart said that on a radio interview, and I wrote about it for Coaching Search. And I had a number of coaches reach out afterward and said, "Yep, that's exactly how I feel." And they put on the show, and when you get the kids, you like it, but man, does it take a toll on people? And you got to do it, because Kevin Sumlin said today, the kids today, they want to be shown the love. The idea of playing it cool and doesn't really work much anymore. And you got to put everything into it, and you need talent to win, but the work-life balance, which is already not good for coaches, is essentially non-existent anymore.
Yeah, well, those are all of my my recruiting hot takes that I had. I think.
All right, now we'll get what I got. That's good. Now we'll get into your specialty. which is basketball. Michigan State, last we saw them, dismantled Rutgers at home and dismantled Northwestern on the road. And they head into Ann Arbor, speaking of Michigan, on Saturday for a very big game in terms of Big Ten seeding wise and perhaps NCAA tournament. I think the Big Ten is still pretty out of reach, but this is the only matchup with Michigan. Wolverines are coming off of their own bad loss to Indiana, and Michigan State, ever since that 3-game losing streak, they've rebounded with 3 very good games. They seem to be back on track. As they head into this game, Joe, what are you looking for?
Yeah, I mean, I think the big thing is whether or not Karis LeVert plays, because he's been out for the last 9 games or so. And so, yeah, to me, that's the built-in hashtag excuses that there have been for the last 5 years or so. So that's a big thing. Other than that, it's sort of a classic Beeline Izzo matchup in a lot of ways, in that Michigan has a bunch of guys who can shoot the ball really well.
Yep.
And not really any standout big men. Mark Denal, or however you pronounce that guy's name, has come on a little bit for them. But for the most part, they're going to play small ball. Duncan Robinson has been pretty terrific for them. He's the D3 transfer from Williams College, who can really shoot the 3 quite well. And what's going to be interesting about that is just the matchup at the 4, which has been sort of MSU's weakness or just matchup difficulty, lineup difficulty for, I think, the whole season. Start out the year with Javon Best playing the 4. That sort of didn't work very well. You've seen a number of guys playing the 4, whether that's Deonta Davis or Gavin Schilling or Kenny Goins or Colby Wallenman or Marvin Clark. And nobody can really fill that Brandon Dawson hole of defensive versatility plus the ability to rebound the ball pretty well. So the matchup at power forward, to me, between it's likely going to be Duncan Robinson for a good chunk of the game, and it sort of depending on where you think that Zach Irvin kind of fits in there, or Aubrey Dawkins kind of plays the 4 for them at times too. But all those guys are generally perimeter players. So just how MSU matches up with Michigan at power forward, to me, is going to be the most interesting piece of this. Probably whether or not Karis LeVert plays, actually, because I don't think LeVert changes that the dynamic of that matchup all that much. So yeah, that's the big thing to me.
Is this a situation where you think Valentine could be playing the 4 on defense?
That's the question.
It would be a little unorthodox, because you'd have Aaron Harris, Bryn Forbes, and maybe McQuaid as the other guard in there.
I think
an unorthodox lineup.
What's interesting is that the lack of Tum Tum Nairn that's another subplot of this whole thing, is whether or not Tum Tum plays, because he could conceivably be back. Matt McIntyre was reporting that in the class that he has with Tum Tum, that Tum Tum was not wearing the boot. Which,
a little only color scoop there.
I think that there's a Freep article about how Tum Tum wasn't going to be wearing the boot anymore anyways. But in any case, he's not wearing the boot, at least. So, there's at least a decent shot that he could end up playing. And Tum Tum's one of the captains. You'd think that he'd be pretty fired up to play Michigan in the one game that they get against Michigan this year. So, yeah, that's another interesting thing. But anyway, so to get back to the point, the question that you asked about Denzel Valentine playing the 4 is, I actually think that without Tum Tum in the lineup, it makes Kenny Goins more playable, because Tum Tum doesn't tend to use a lot of possessions. He's a low usage player who basically is just trying to create for others, but is a little bit of an offensive liability in that he can't really shoot. He can't really create for himself very well unless it's on the fast break, and he can kind of get to the rim easily. it's, I think, quite hard for this team to play both Kenny Goins and Tum Tum at the same time, because neither of those guys can do much creation offensively,
Right.
or even just shooting the ball, right? You just get really limited offensively with those two guys in the game at the same time. Now, if Tum Tum's not playing, I think that it becomes a lot easier. If you've got Kenny Goins at the 4 for his defensive versatility and ability to guard a little bit on the perimeter, then I think that it makes the most sense in that he can continue to rebound the ball and isn't going to be too much of an offensive liability if you've got Denzel Valentine and Aaron Harris and then McQuaid or Bryn Forbes in the game. But your question's a good one, and I think that it's one of the lineups, the very few lineups that we have not seen Tom Izzo use, and could be pretty useful given the depth on the wing. If you figure that Javon Best just can't really play the 4 very much. So, yeah, and if playing Javon Best and Denzel Valentine, or Marvin Clark and Denzel Valentine at the same time, could give you some ability to switch on the perimeter with a Zach Irvin and a Duncan Robinson both in the game. So that's not a bad thought, and I'd like to see them do it just to see how it works out to some degree. But at the same time, I've been happy with the fact that Tom Izzo has chopped the rotation to a large extent, and I think that that's been helpful overall. So that's a very politician answer to your question.
It's going to be a very interesting matchup, because the way Indiana went on a 28-0 run against Michigan, and a big part of that was they played very good defense, and Michigan comes into this game number 5 in effective field goals, field goal percentage, number 5 shooting team. MSU is the number 1 effective field goal percentage defense. So it's going to be very interesting to see how well MSU plays defense, because how they go always seems to come back to their defense. The losses to Iowa, Wisconsin, Nebraska, all 4 of the losses, their defense was very poor. In the last 3 games, their defense has been pretty good to very good, and they're only 27th in adjusted efficiency, because the problem is they have problems with fouling, and they don't force many turnovers. So it's going to come down to basically preventing Michigan from making shots. And Michigan's not a team. The good thing for Michigan is that for MSU is that Michigan's not a team that gets the free throw line. They're 335th in the country in free throw rate, because they're a jump shooting team. That 46% of their shots are 3-pointers. That's nearly half. So the fact that MSU's probably not going to foul would seem to help their defense in a game where I think defense is going to be the key.
Yeah, what'll be interesting about that, though, is just because Michigan is not being particularly aggressive in getting to the rim does not necessarily mean that they won't rack up fouls, given the issues that MSU has had with fouls, team foul count in halves of various games, especially playing at the Chrysler Center. Could be a pretty interesting piece of this. The other thing is, if Michigan turns the ball over ever, because they're a top 10 team in turnover percentage offensively, MSU virtually never forces turnovers. So you're going to see a lot of shots out of Michigan, and a lot of those will be threes. And so to me, it seems like a pretty high variance game from Michigan's offense perspective. Either, if they're shooting well from deep, then it could be a tough game for MSU. If they're off, then MSU could walk away with a pretty big win as well. So that's the one thing. The other interesting thing is that, actually just perusing Michigan's profile right now, Michigan does a good job of rebounding the ball defensively. It's one of the better traits.
They've been under Beeline. They're always a terrible offensive rebounding team. They're usually a pretty good defensive rebounding team. Last year they weren't very good, but they weren't a very good team last year. But they're usually decent on the defensive glass, and that's the case again this year.
And that probably has just a lot to do with sending guys to the defensive glass instead of trying to get out and get in transition, because they always play quite slow offensively.
Yeah, you talk about the high variance with Michigan. Here are the scores of their losses. 86-70, 74-60, 82-58, 87-70, 82-71, 80-67. Those are all blowout losses. So when you talk about that variance, when they lose, they lose hard, and a lot of that comes down to what they're able to do offensively, because defensively they're about average. So they haven't lost a close game. They haven't really played many close games. I'm trying to see how many within 5, 1, 2. They played 2 games that finished within 5 points. I think they won both of them. So
beat Texas by 6.
Yeah. So they're always one of those teams that can lose to anybody, can beat anybody, just kind of because of the style they play. And against MSU at Chrysler, they tend to just get hot shooting. They didn't last year. That last year was MSU's first win in quite a few years there. So it's always been a tough place to play for MSU. And coming off of that loss, Beeline's usually pretty good coming off a bad loss. And with it being that the MSU game, I have to imagine they'll be pretty fired up. This is just one of those classic Beeline Izzo matchups, and in terms of what the team profiles are, essentially.
And it might actually. What the other weird thing is that I'm not sure if Karis LeVert coming back for his first game in 10 games would be necessarily a major benefit for Michigan, in that it takes time for guys to get back in the flow of the game, especially when guys have sort of assumed new roles after guys have been out for a little bit of time. You saw that with MSU and Denzel Valentine being out for a few games, and integrating him back into the offense in some ways was somewhat painful at times, I thought, especially in the blowout loss to Iowa at the Breslin Center. So the game's going to be interesting because it's a great test of MSU's ability to figure out what's happening at power forward, which has been a problem all year long, and can be a major issue in this game, just given how good Duncan Robinson is. I mean, he's shooting an absurd percentage from 3, and
I found out his weakness though. Someone had tweeted before the Indiana game that some girls said hi to him in warmups, and he waved, and then he missed 4 of his next 5 shots. So they don't play at Breslin this year, but had they done that, I think the Izzone would have had a key to the game. Now, here's a question for you. We're kind of going in circles here,
sure,
because there's not much to say. So let me throw something out there. Based on how MSU's played in the last 3 games, do you think they are a better team without Lou Rawls, Tum Tum Nairn playing?
A better team? That's a really good question.
Because some people like to throw that out there on the Twitter. Offensively,
yes. I think defensively, probably not. The trick is that if there was another true point guard on the roster, I think the answer would probably be yes. The issue is just that Matt McQuaid is not that guy at this point. He just, no. I don't think he quite has the feel for it, and I think in future years he'll probably get there, but at this point he does not. And playing Denzel Valentine at the point works pretty much, but I think in some ways that Valentine is more effective off the ball as catch and shoot and facilitator and general decoy in some ways. So that's a tough question. And the other thing is, I have a firmly held belief that Tum Tum's value is very difficult to quantify in a number of ways. I thought last year it was clear that when he took on a larger role midway through the conference season, that the team was playing better, and maybe that was just correlation and not causation, but there was something that I couldn't put my finger on that was not reflected statistically about his play that was helpful to this team. Now, maybe you get that anyways by him being on the bench, whether that's just general excitement or leadership ability or what have you, and him not being in the game but being on the bench gives you 90% of whatever it was that he gave you by being in the game. So that's a tough question, but ultimately I'd like to have him healthy, if for no other reason than just that I feel a little bit more comfortable when he's playing point guard compared to like Bryn Forbes bringing up the ball at times, or Matt McQuaid running the point.
Yeah.
What do you think on that?
I think it's good to have him. You need to have him available, as opposed to starting versus how many minutes. I don't know. If this was one of those MSU teams that, needed to grind out 60 points and win a low-scoring game, I think he'd fit that mold more. When you look at the offensive weapons on this team, when you have Valentine, Harris, now Costello, Forbes, Quaid, Davis, I think the offense has – I don't have the numbers. Izzo probably has the numbers, but it has felt like with as many offensive weapons as they do have, the offense has been better when he's not been in the game, and Valentine has been able to be the lead distributor to the other guys who can shoot the ball. Because when a lot of, if Valentine's half running the point when Nairn's in the game, it's kind of not working very well. Although say defensively, it's very hard to quantify, like you said, what he's there. He's I think a very important part of this team. As far as his usage isn't very high, but his minutes rate is. So I think maybe the minutes would need to fall a little bit. But the last few games, I know Northwestern and Rutgers aren't any good, but I think the offense gets in a flow more when they have Valentine, being the distributor. And I don't know how much Valentine can take it. I think it's good to have Nairn to spell Valentine, but I think Valentine, the offense runs better when Valentine is the number one point guard on the team, and it's just about not running him into the ground. So
I have a similar hypothetical or just general question to ask you,
Hit me.
which is, what do you, so along the lines of what I was talking about with this matchup against Michigan, who do you think is the crunch time power forward that MSU should be using going forward?
This is assuming Costello is the center?
Right, yeah.
Davis. Yeah, Deontay Davis. He
I think I agree.
He has confidence for a true freshman. He doesn't, the moment doesn't seem too big for him. He's had his issues on defense, but I think he's got the confidence that I think he got more confidence than Gavin Schilling typically has, and Kenny Goins, who he's a newcomer. So I think it's Deontay Davis down the stretch, and I don't. It was a couple weeks ago. I don't remember, but was Davis in the game down the stretch against Maryland? Do you remember? I remember Costello was the one making the plays.
That's a good question. I don't remember. I think so. I think so. So I think you're right.
He got a couple of blocks late.
Yeah, so I think you're right, and I think the reason for that is that he is not a major negative defensively, even against stretch fours. He can get lost a little bit, but I do think that he just affects a lot of shots taken near the rim, and he's generally athletic enough to run around with more stretch four types, and that on the other end he is a mismatch for the smaller power forwards. So I think that the advantage that he yields on offense is probably worth whatever small disadvantages on defense. And I don't think that the difference between him and Kenny Goins on the defensive end is so pronounced that it is worth not playing and Davis.
And Davis provides a lot more if there's if they want to get a fast break out of something. I think I don't remember what game it was. I think it was they wanted to run a fast break Valentine with I think Goins, but Goins wasn't really ready. I'm looking at numbers. Davis is shooting 63% on twos on the year. That's real good. That's top 60 nationally, and he's also top 60 in offensive rebounding, number 16 in blocks. I think he can get lost a little bit on defense, but I think it outweighs everything else that it's outweighed by everything else that he brings. So down the stretch, I think Davis is your go-to number 4 guy. Now, in terms of options on the floor, I think Valentine's number 1, Forbes is number 2, Harris is maybe Costello is number 3, Harris is number 4, and Davis would be number 5. But of the power forwards, I think that's what I'd be going with.
Yeah, I agree with you, and I think that the 5 guys that you just listed are should be the crunch time 5 going forward. Valentine, Harris, Forbes, Davis, and Costello, I think should be.
And one more comment on Nairn while we're talking about it.
Sure.
I might feel a little bit differently if he was shooting better than 43% from the free throw line. He's 10 for 23 in the year. For a point guard, that can't be the case, and you can't have him out there late in games because of the fouls, and you can't trust him to make the free throws. So that's another drawback on him.
So I think there's two more things about Tum Tum. One is that I think that raw speed is one of the more difficult attributes to actually realize a result from that advantage, right? If you've got a guy like Tum Tum who is very clearly the fastest dude on the floor, basically in any game, that's an advantage. But I think that it's pretty difficult to actually exercise that advantage in a way that is meaningful, just because basketball courts are relatively short, right? You only get You only get, what, 90 feet? Whereas on a football field, it's a little bit different. Raw speed has a lot bigger of an effect just because there's a lot more space that a guy can cover.
I mean, I think it's important with the way MSU tries to run. He's been more aggressive this year, taking the ball to the hoop, and that's good. And I think next year it'll improve, and senior year it'll be even better. And by senior year, you may have a guy who can consistently get to the bucket and score. But until then, and make free throws if he doesn't. So. Until then, I think they need to hold out on his minutes again. So, all right. So it's Michigan. As we wrap up here, Michigan game. Who you got?
I think MSU wins. Do you want me to give a
KenPom has
prediction?
KenPom has it 73-71 for Michigan, or for MSU. I'm sorry, 73-71 for MSU, with a 59% chance of a Spartan win. Yeah, sure. Give a score if you want.
I think it ends up being a little bit higher scoring than that. I think it'll be, let's say, 79-72. MSU wins.
Yeah, I was thinking something similar. I'll go 75-70 for MSU. I think it'll be a battle, but I think MSU will make the plays down the stretch. So after that, I mean, we won't have we won't be podcasting until after the next game, which is Purdue at Purdue. That one, they're a 3-point underdog. Purdue's been struggling of late. They seem to be, top of the Big Ten, but they've struggled of late. Do you have a quick matchup thought and pick for the Purdue game?
Sure. I mean, that game's going to be very interesting from a size perspective.
It's a complete opposite.
Right. But MSU's got the bigs to deal with Purdue, and I think that Denzel Valentine could be a pretty major difference in that game. At the same time, though, traveling to Purdue is going to be pretty tough. I think that that's probably very potentially the last Big Ten loss that MSU has, and we'll say it's a close game, but that MSU loses. I don't know. I see a little bit of a lower scoring game there. 66-63.
For who?
For Purdue.
Okay. Yeah, I was actually going to pick Purdue too. I'm going to say Purdue wins by 10. I'll go 68-58 Purdue win. I think Purdue will kind of no 75-65 Purdue. I think they'll get some points. I think Purdue will win that one at home. So,
what's really interesting though is that after that Purdue game, the schedule really eases up for MSU. They play Indiana at home, Wisconsin at home, Ohio State on the road, Penn State at home, Rutgers on the road, and then Ohio State at home.
Yeah,
so,
I mean,
KenPom gives MSU at least a 2/3 chance of winning every one of the games after that Purdue game. So there's a pretty good chance that MSU ends up 13-5 in conference if they beat Michigan and lose to Purdue. So that could be interesting. If MSU comes away with 2 wins in the next 2 games, they could be set up for potentially getting back up to the Iowa level and maybe making a run at a share of the Big Ten title. So these next 2 games, I think, are going to really kind of shape
or at least the number 2 seed. If they win the next year, I think they'll be in a very good position for the 2, along battling the likes of Indiana. So big 2-game stretch here at Michigan on Saturday, at Purdue on Tuesday. We will talk to you guys after that. I'm not sure if we'll record it Tuesday or Wednesday, but appreciate you guys getting through here to listen. Once again, I always forget to plug stuff before the podcast every time. I'm on Twitter at Chris Vanini. He's at JOBIN, number 2 letter E, as well as at The Only Colors. And signing days in the books, but a lot of good basketball stuff still coming. Make sure you're checking out theonlycolors.com for a lot of good stuff and interacting in the comment section. Got a lot of good people on the site. So appreciate you guys for listening to the podcast, and we will talk to you guys next week. See you.
See ya.